Shalom and welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Heartland, your host. Lots of things happen around here these days. We've got the pruning that's coming up here really soon, starting at the, actually kicking off after you guys probably hearing this podcast. I'm recording it a little bit earlier, so by the time you guys hear this, we'll have started the pruning season, going in there and trimming the grapevines on the mountains of Samaria. So that's happening. There's still a few trips if any of you guys are still interested towards the end of the pruning season. If you guys want to jump in and be a part of this amazing thing, that's still a possibility. So if you're interested, it's getting right to the deadline. So jump in there and let us know. We can get you on the mountains of Israel pruning the prophetic grapevines there. We're also doing our year-end campaign. I think it will end on the very end of the month. And so if you guys haven't checked that out, there's a really awesome video the media team put together. And I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much to all of you guys who have already jumped on there and given. We are so blessed to be able to be your hands and feet in the lands of Israel. Thank you so much. If it wasn't for people like you that give, then we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. So really, really thank you for that. And if anybody hasn't had a chance to jump on there, I would encourage you to do that. This is what really, this year-end fundraiser is really what puts us into 2018 on a good foot and able to accomplish the things that we feel like God has put on our laps to accomplish. So thank you so much. And for all those you have and all those of you guys who will go on and make a donation, we really appreciate that. This week's Torah portion is Vayechi, and he lived, which is in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28 through chapter 50, verse 26. And we start off the portion with Jacob, with Israel, basically telling Joseph to promise that he will bury him in the land of Israel. It's kind of interesting. You look at the wording there. It's like Yaakov says, hey, he calls Joseph to him. He says, I want to be buried in the land of Israel, in the cave of Machpelah, where my father and mothers were buried. And Joseph says, okay, yes, I'll do that. And he says, no, swear to me that you're going to make this happen. And it's like, he wasn't just going to go on a, handshake, so to speak. He was like going to make him swear that he was going to take him back to the land of Israel and be buried there. And as I was thinking about this, I was pondering the thought, because we know the analogy of coming out of Egypt, and basically it's like, leaving sin, leaving idol worship, leaving everything that's not God, basically, and then giving ourselves fully over into God's care. We're going to be going into the book of Exodus in the coming portions, and in this miraculous story of coming out of Egypt. And we see here that our forefather Jacob was serious about this, about not staying in Egypt, about coming out, being taken out, and back to the land of Israel. And as I was thinking about this, I was realizing that within a lot of my own thinking in a lot of Christian circles, we've taken this phrase, to be in the world but not of the world, to kind of allow us to do things, in the world. It's like, okay, no, I can be in the world. I can be at things that are maybe a little bit ungodly, or maybe, do something that's kind of, on the edge, whatever that edge is for different people, if it's watching a movie that, maybe has a little bit of bad in it, or, whatever you consider bad, or whatever it is. Whatever that line is for you. But here we see that, like our father Jacob, he totally leaves Egypt. He's running away from it. So I think we should really define how we interpret this scripture to be in the world, but not of the world. What does that really mean in everyday practice? What does it mean to live in this world, but not be of it? Obviously, practically speaking, they were still in the world in Egypt or in Israel. And so that was kind of my thought as well. This pulling out of Egypt was actually pulling away from sin and idolatry and things that were not of God. So basically we need to live in this world. We need to, like I was talking on last week's podcast, bringing heaven to earth, basically. And that's exactly what Yeshua's prayer was, on earth as it is in heaven, but not participate and not put ourselves in a place where we're going to fall into sin, or have that Egyptian, so to speak, life or way of living, or put ourselves in that place. So may God give us the wisdom to know how to leave Egypt completely, to leave sin, to leave any kind of idolatry, and be completely given over to His will. Because these children of Israel, I think maybe more a liberal reproach would be, hey, what was the big deal? How come God couldn't use the children of Israel in Egypt? What's wrong with Egypt? What's wrong with the Egyptians? Is God, saying that they're not people, or that this land wasn't something that He created? Obviously, God created the whole world. What's really going on here? And so it's just a really fascinating thought here. Is like they couldn't fulfill God's will for them in the land of Egypt. They had to go to the land of Israel. And so the lesson that I'm kind of pulling from this is we have to completely leave any kind of sin and idolatry completely, and move into a place where we're going to be safe and out of evil and harm's way, and fully walking in God's will. And that's going to be something different for each different person. And that's where I was really inspired to do, is like really pray, okay, God, what is that for me? What place am I, walking into your will, or what places am I not walking into your will? So help me to find that place. So then we have Jacob coming to the end of his life and calling in Joseph, and calling in Joseph's children, Ephraim and Manasseh, and then blessing them. They're getting this blessing from their grandfather. And so I just want to take a little bit here and just talk about the importance of blessing. It's definitely been something in my life that has meant so much to me, and something that I feel like my father was really able to kind of gain back, because in our culture today, in Western culture and American culture, there's no emphasis at all put on the blessing, speaking life into anyone, but especially into your children, and especially from fathers to sons. And here we have this biblical example of Jacob blessing his grandchildren, and then after that, the next chapters, blessing his sons, speaking into their lives. I think we tend to, in our culture, have the mentality, there's the saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And but actually, that's not a very biblical statement. If we go back and look in the scripture, obviously, James is one of the most, that talks a lot about the tongue. And some pretty serious words he has to say in chapter 1, verse 26. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. So that's a pretty strong statement. Everything, like your whole walk with God, is worthless if you don't bridle your tongue. Hey, that's pretty serious. In chapter 3, verse 1, talks about being careful if you're going to be a teacher. And they say even admonishing not very many people should become teachers, because we have to be careful, with our tongue. And verse 5, there in chapter 3, says the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. This is some pretty, serious verbiage, words coming out here. In verse 8, it says, no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. So we have to be super careful, and this is actually something we've learned a lot about over the years being with the Jewish people, and this is something that they really take seriously, is their words, what they speak. And I think it's something that we definitely in our culture need to learn, because again, there's this kind of mentality or attitude that, you can say whatever you want, it's not going to hurt me. But the reality is, words have a lot of power, a lot of strength. They do affect us. When we lay in bed at night, we're thinking about what so-and-so said, or what I said, or what somebody else said to somebody else. The reality is these things do affect us, and we need to be aware of this, and we need to be super careful with our words. My brother Braden actually put a song to wrote a song about this thought, and took this verse from James. It says, no man can tame the tongue. But Braden wrote in a song, you're not a man, and I am one. So here's my tongue. Please tame it for your glory. So we're asking, God to say, hey, I'm a human, and James here is saying that a human is incapable of taming his tongue, and you're not a man, and I am one. So here's my tongue. Please tame it for your glory. You are able. You have, the power to redeem us, to save us from our wickedness, from this tongue that is, like James is saying it, this very dangerous thing. There's a story. That very Jewish story that I read about one time, and it was very, very interesting. It talked about this king in this kingdom, and all of a sudden the king fell really, really sick. He was just so sick, and doctors came in and were trying to figure out what was going on. And finally, the doctors came out and said, "You know what? In order to cure this illness, we have to find the milk of a lioness." And so the king was like, well, how in the world are we going to do that? And so they put this huge, price up there for anybody that could go and find and bring lioness milk. There's this huge reward. And so this man says, okay, I'm up for it. I'm going to go and do this. And so he goes out into the, jungles and tries to find this lioness, finally finds it and slowly feeds it and does different things, and goes up and finally is able to get this milk from this lioness and returns as fast as he can to the king. And as he's making his way back to the king, all of a sudden the different parts of his body start arguing with each other. And the hands say, hey, I'm so glad that I was able to perform this great deed and milk the lioness. And I'm obviously the best out of all the members of the body, the most usable, the thing that can do the most. And the eyes said, wait a second, if we weren't able to actually see the lioness, how you would have never been able to get close enough to, milk the thing. And the feet said, well, wait a second, if I wasn't able to walk so quietly and stealthily over to the lion to milk it, it would have never happened in the first place. What are you talking about? And the ears said, well, if I hadn't listened so carefully and been able to find this lioness, and all the different members are all arguing with each other, which one was the best, which one was actually able to, was the main thing, and managing this incredible feat. And so all of a sudden the tongue speaks up and says, well, and all the rest of them are like, oh, get out of here. You didn't have anything to do with any of this. You definitely don't have a place to, speak up or to feel like you did anything. You didn't have any part of this. So the tongue just kind of went quiet. And so they get to the palace before the king, and he's going to bring this milk up and give it to the king. He starts walking in, and the guards are bringing him forward to the king. And he says, oh, great and mighty king, may your kingdom reign forever. And I have brought you the milk of a baboon. And all of a sudden the king's like furious. He's like, what? How dare you come in here and mock the king? Guards, take him away. So immediately the hands and the feet and all the different pieces, parts of the body are like, what's going on? Wait, how did this happen? And the tongue is just like, well, we're just seeing here who's the most powerful here. And they're like, no, please, tongue, do something. You're the only one who can save us. So finally the tongue speaks up and says, no, I'm sorry. I was just in my nervousness that I accidentally said baboon. It is, in fact, the milk of a lion. So they go and they tested the milk, and they found out that in fact it was. And so the king was able to drink the milk and was cured and lived for many, many more years after that. And so from this parable, we learn that the power of life and death are in the tongue. That was just a really interesting story that really, portrays this thought really well. I mentioned that Dad would bless us, and basically it was every Friday night when we started doing Shabbat, started recognizing Shabbat, and Dad would gather us all around, have a special meal, and do the different blessings and things. And then Dad would go around to each one of us and, put his right hand on our head, and then he would say a blessing. And in the beginning, Dad, he was trying to figure out this whole thing too and how this worked. And so he would say different things, praying blessing over us, something maybe that we did that week, or something that particular about our character that he appreciated him, he bless us in that. And after a while, he kind of got in there was like a certain thing that he would say every week, and then maybe he would add a little bit, to that. I can remember, I remember it really clearly, which really shows how powerful it is, how much I actually paid attention to that. And obviously repetition pretty much every week. There were some weeks that we had a lot going on or whatever, we didn't make it, but Dad made an effort to bless us every week. And he would say, I pray for Zach, I pray for his wife and their children from this generation forward, that they would know your ways and know your name, because Zach knows your ways and knows your name. And that phrase just really always stuck with me, and I actually took that, and now I pray that over my boys every Friday night as well, and just bless them. And it's such a powerful thing, like, from this generation forth. And this was obviously before we were married. So, blessing our wife was, just something early on that we knew that, God was, the Dad was blessing us and was concerned about and was praying for our future spouses, which is really powerful. And, that we would be able to begin, that they would know, God's name and his ways, because, we knew his ways and knew his name. So, it was the generational effect. We were beginning right then to begin a generation that would know God, know his name, know his ways. And I just remember that being super, super powerful and a blessing. I know it's also traditional in Jewish circles to do the Aaronic blessing. A lot of you guys are familiar with that. It's gone pretty big within the Messianic movement, or Torah pursuant people. But it's taken from the passage in Numbers chapter 6, starting verse 22, where God speaks to Moshe and says, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, thus you shall bless the people of Israel. You shall say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So shall you put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. And so it's interesting here. We see that, basically God commanding, giving a commandment here that Aaron and the priest were supposed to bless the people of Israel. So it's another really amazing picture of God's mercy and his blessing on his people. And he says, when you do this, I will bless them. So it's like when we speak words where we are bringing forth, either God's will or not. And so, we're bringing things into pass by the things that we speak. So it's not really us. It's not necessarily like we have some kind of supernatural power, but when we speak, we allow God to come in and give his blessing. There's a really neat version of the Aaronic blessing sung in Hebrew by a guy named Yariv Goldman. It's Yariv Goldman. And so I'd encourage you to look that up. He's got a pretty neat tune to it. And then, in the synagogues, the Jewish people will pray. They'll have the Kohanim, the Levite priests, come up to the front of the synagogue, and they'll put their tallits over, and then they do a special thing with their hands, and then they pray this blessing over the whole congregation. So it's a really neat thing that they do. And basically, the way they do in synagogue is they'll say each word, they'll sing a word, and then it'll be repeated back from the congregation. That's the way I've seen it done in some synagogues. I'm not sure if that's across the board or not, but so it's kind of a neat, kind of a repetition sort of thing. So next in the Torah portion, we have Jacob's blessing to all of his sons. We have Jacob again being asked to be buried in Machpelah. And then we have this great mourning of the Egyptians. And this really stuck out to me this time. I hadn't really ever noticed it in such a big way, but noticing that all these Egyptians who were involved in this ceremony, in this mourning that was happening for Jacob after he died, it really struck me as interesting how these Egyptians were going and mourning the death of Jacob, and then on this procession back up to the land of Israel, and so much so that the people of the land are like, wow, this must be a great mourning of the Egyptians. This is crazy. And so they go in, they bury Yaakov in the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron. Some of you guys you've been with us, you've actually been there. We usually take all of our volunteers there to tour the cave there, the patriarchs, and it's a really incredible story there in Hebron. There's a synagogue, and quite a few Jewish families are moving in, and have a Jewish presence there. It's really incredible. It's a little bit different than what we have in Shomron up in Har Bracha. In that area, you have Jewish communities that are kind of set apart, and then the Arab communities, will be a little ways away. Whereas in Hebron, it's like this Jewish community is like smack dab in the middle of this huge, Arab town. There's like, thousands and thousands of Arab, and then this, small Jewish community right in the center. And so they're like literally one apartment building, and the next apartment building is like, is how close they are. So these courageous settlers who are going in there and reclaiming the land that, as we can see in this Torah portion, has such huge significance to the Jewish people, that their forefathers were buried in this place, is a really big deal. And we can see how big of a deal it is just by how much Yaakov, Jacob is asking, hey, bring me back, take me back to the land to be buried. I don't want to be buried here. This is a really big deal. And something that I think, in today's world, today's culture, we don't really see it so much, but then it was. And I think if it was for them, we should try to understand why. And towards the end of the Torah portion, we have Yosef also asking, and so this is maybe more, shows us even more so how serious it is, because Joseph, he had spent most of his life in Egypt, and he had, been ruler there. And like, there could be a lot of reasons why you would think, well, hey, why wouldn't he want to just be buried there? But he also said, don't leave me here. Take my bones up to the land of Israel. Which is one thought I have, which I didn't get time to really study it out, is like, one question that I had was, why did Yosef get buried in Shechem instead of in the cave of Machpelah? You'd think if Jacob got taken back to Machpelah, and that was the burial cave of the foremothers, you would think that would be where Yosef would also want to be buried. But we see that when his bones are taken back, they're actually put in Shechem, and we can read that later on in the book of Joshua. It talks about how they put the bones of Yosef there, and even today, and those of you who've been with us in the land of Israel, there on Har Bracha, there's actually a lookout where you can look down and see in the city of Shechem exactly where where Yosef's tomb is located. Which is also, there's some interesting thoughts about it that we've learned just being there. One is that, that's the area where Yosef was taken from, because Yaakov told Joseph, go, way back in the beginning, go and find your brothers. They're feeding their flocks in Shechem, right, in Shechem. And so he runs into Shechem, and they say, oh, he's a little bit further north in Dotan. And so he goes up to Dotan, and then that's when the whole thing happens, where he gets thrown in a pit and then taken away. So basically the same general area where Joseph is taken from and sold into Egypt, that's where he's brought back to. And place. It's also interesting to note that general area is also, obviously they were feeding their flocks there, so it's a very, good place for livestock, but also that's the general area where they would do a lot of wheat, and there's like a lot of like there's a certain blessing of productivity there that I've heard the Jewish people talk about. And even in Shechem today, the Arabs that are there are benefiting some from this blessing. Before the Intifada started, there would be a lot of Jewish people that go in there and buy furniture and different things from Shechem, because this blessing of productivity and stuff there. And there's several valleys right there specifically that I'm thinking of, as Yosef, he's going down to Egypt, and as he dreams about this wheat and these grains, and then, is able to save the whole world through interpreting the dream. This area back in Shechem is actually a very known area for wheat, for the wheat fields that are grown. There's actually the Tirsa Valley, and then the other valley close by is known for their wheat production. So, thank you guys so much for listening, and Shabbat Shalom, and remember, the land of Israel is beautiful and exceedingly good. Shabbat Shalom.
Restoration.